Now it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, the artist Dred Scott. Dred Scott makes revolutionary art to propel history forward. He first received national attention in 1989 when his art became the center of controversy over its use of the American flag while he was a student at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. President H.W. Bush called his art disgraceful, and the entire US Senate denounced this work when they passed legislation to protect the flag. He works in a range of media, including installation, photography, screen printing, video, and performance. In 2006, the Whitney Biennial included his art in the Wrong Gallery Down by Law section, and his work has also been in exhibitions at MoMA's PS1, the Contemporary Art Museum Houston, the Brooklyn Museum, and the Pori Art Museum in Finland. In 2012, the Brooklyn Academy of Music, BAM, presented his performance, Dred Scott Decision, as part of their 30th anniversary Next Wave Festival. His work is in the collections of the Whitney Museum, the New Museum of Contemporary Art here in New York, and the Akron Art Museum. He is a recipient of a Creative Capital Foundation grant, a Mid-Atlantic Arts Foundation Artists and Communities grant, fellowships from the New York Foundation for the Arts, and was a resident at Art Omni International Artists Residency. He's currently a fellow at A Blade of Grass arts organization that focuses on socially engaged art. So it's a huge pleasure and privilege to be able to have him with us here today. Please give a warm welcome to Dred Scott.
Thank you, and it's really cool that Joyce Kozlov is going to come here, and you guys should attend that too. Just a brief word, some people at places where I talk now, everybody loves to live tweet. I am, discouraging you from doing that. Pay attention to me, but if you don't want to pay attention to me and you really want to tweet about it, that's who I am and the hashtag. So, but again, just pay attention. It'd be better, the rest of the world, they can look at it online. So I'm gonna just talk to you for a couple minutes before showing images, and so just want to tell you, a little bit of background about how I think about making work and the kind of work that I make, so you can have some context for the work I'm going to show. I'm a multidisciplinary artist. I do work in performance and photography and photographs and video and sculpture and painting and just about anything that I can get my hands on. And so the question kind of is, well, what makes a Dred Scott work a Dred Scott work? And as it said, I make revolutionary art to propel history forward. But as part of that, what does that mean? And how do I think about that? Well, part of it is that I really want my work to illuminate this era. And the question is, what is this era? So I have some questions for you. They're just sort of yes or no questions. You can shout them out. And so the first question is, do you guys have hope for the future? No, yes? All right, good. No firm agreement there, which it's interesting. I ask that question a lot, and it used to be everybody was like, yeah, I got hope for the future. Now it's like, I don't know so much. So anyway, next question. Do you guys think the US government tortures people? Yes. Yay, torture, all right. Do you think that basic rights in this country are being eroded? Yes. Okay, do you think that having 1 in 9 young black men in prison is acceptable? Do you think that a society where 1 in 4 women is battered during her lifetime is a model society to uphold? No. Okay, so longer sentences, I'm sorry. Does it make you comfortable that the US government is spying on all email, websites, and phone calls that everybody makes anywhere on the planet? No. Okay, do you think that American lives are more important than other people's lives? No. Do you think that the government lies to you? Does a society where the police murder people, unarmed people on video, and then work to cover up the murder have any legitimacy? No. Does a society that knowingly poisons the drinking water of its citizens have any legitimacy? No. Do you think that this government values your life? No. Okay, so for those of you who had hope for the future, the present's not looking so good, is it? Now, I have hope for the future too. But what is that hope based on? Well, my hope is that people, this is a profoundly polarized world where a tiny handful of people control the great wealth and knowledge that humanity as a whole have created. But the hope is that it does not have to be this way. We don't actually have to live like this. We need revolution, and people can make that revolution, and as part of making that revolution, transform themselves in the process. So my work is about bringing that new world into being, and that's why I get up in the morning, and it's why I make the work that I do. And I hope that in seeing it, that it contributes to an overall process that people become part of a movement for revolution in a complex way. There's no one-to-one, people aren't going to see my work, then go to a demonstration. But I do think that it's part of the intellectual ferment of a society that this work kind of contributes to. And so with that in mind, I'm going to show some work. So this is an artwork called What's the Proper Way to Display a U.S. Flag? And can we get the lights on me to dim a bit so you can focus more on the images on the screen? Fantastic, thanks. And so this is a work called What's the Proper Way to Display a U.S. Flag? And it is an installation for audience participation. It has a photo montage up on the wall, which I'll show you a detail of in a second. Below that was books on a shelf that were originally blank, and below that was a 3x5 foot flag that people had the option of standing on as they answered the question, or wrote responses to the question, what's the proper way to display a U.S. flag? That question was up at the top, and then there was South Koreans burning American flags, holding signs saying, "Yankee, go home, son of a bitch." And then below that were flag-draped coffins coming back from Vietnam in a troop transport. And so this work became the center of controversy when I was an undergraduate student at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. This is a demonstration of 2,500 reactionary veterans, mostly from World War II and the Korean War. And this is at the Art Institute of Chicago, which is physically attached to the School of the Art Institute, and there's also many organizational and other ties that bind them together. And so they chanted things, these veterans, like the flag and the artist, hang them both high, bringing back images of lynching. And it got to the point where this became not just a controversy in Chicago, but the point where George Bush publicly denounced the work. He called the work disgraceful. So I'm a 24-year-old undergraduate art student in a small Midwestern city, well, not so small, but a Midwestern city that's not New York, at an art school. And the President of the United States knows I exist, and he doesn't like what I'm doing. I'm like, this is great. I want to do this job for the rest of my life. I knew that it was an extraordinary thing, that I didn't expect art to have that effect all the time, and certainly not happen to my work, but it was actually very significant. And then after President Bush denounced it, it got to the point where the Senate voted to ban display of the flag on the floor or ground. And it said, the Senate on Thursday voted 97-0 to outlaw displaying the flag of the United States on the floor or ground, and announced a flag exhibit on the floor of the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. I don't know much about art, but I know desecration when I see it, said Minority Leader Robert J. Dole, Republican from Kansas, in introducing this measure. This disgraceful display needs much more than symbolic action. And so this is a country with the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, Marines. It's invading countries left and right. It's got hundreds of thousands of cops. And it is this very powerful country. And yet it is worried about the artwork of a student at a student exhibition. And so this taught me a lot about the power of art, that when people were standing in line for an hour to see my work, and when people were calling up to talk radio shows, including people from housing projects, to not only say that they politically supported what I was doing, but also gave art criticism as feedback, that was something that was really profound for me, and it really sort of affirmed that the art that I was doing could matter. And so prior to that, if you'd asked whether art could matter or whether it could change the world, I would have definitely said yes. But if you really pressed me on it, I would have said yes. If your name is Bruce Springsteen or Chuck D or Steven Spielberg, those guys reach millions and millions of people. I'm a visual artist. Nobody's going to see this. But then the President of the United States is denouncing it. Veterans are standing in line wanting to kill me, and others are actually wanting to defend me, including standing in front of the veterans saying, if you want to get to him, you have to go through us first. And so it was it really showed that this art could matter tremendously to people far and wide. And from that day on, I've been sort of on that mission to make art that really profoundly mattered to change the world. And so, but then there is this problem. There's this really reactionary law that's on the books, which in part was set to outlaw my artwork. And so what does one do when one is faced with reactionary and unjust laws? Well, I hope you defy them. So this is me burning flags on the steps of the U.S. Capitol, and there were other people that did it along with me. There's a long, complicated history that I won't go into, but it was definitely the right thing to do, to burn flags on the steps of the Capitol to defy and break this law, and that ended up in the Supreme Court. And so this is the brief from the Supreme Court, and you could see it's got United States of America versus Sean Eichmann et al. I'm part of et al. Because, as I said, there were three other people that burned flags with me. Sean Eichmann, who was another revolutionary artist, Dave Blaylock, who was a Vietnam veteran, and Joey Johnson, who was a defendant from a previous flag burning case. And so this went to the Supreme Court, and they took it expecting to put me in jail for a year and fine me about $10,000. But because of the really intense political battle that was waged, you guys can do whatever you want with the flag. You can fly it on a pole, you can make art with it, you can wipe your butt with it, you can blow your nose in it. It was a landmark free expression First Amendment decision. So again, this piece was made in 1988. It became center of controversy in 89. The Supreme Court ruling comes down in 1990. And we're going to fast forward to 2011. So this is an artwork called Burning the U.S. Constitution. I guess we're in the burning segment of the presentation. We'll get to more fire in a little bit. But this is a project called Burning the U.S. Constitution. And I was working on another set of paintings. And the paintings were looking at the history of revolution, particularly the arc of communist revolution. And as part of that, I was looking at a lot of contemporary Chinese artists. And so in 2010, I started to really become aware and pay a lot of attention to Ai Weiwei. And I had done a piece called Dropping a Han Dynasty Urn, which this is just Ai standing with a Han Dynasty urn, and then a Han Dynasty urn between his hands in the ground, and a Han Dynasty urn smashed and in pieces in the ground. And one of the things that he said about why he would do something like this, in addition to trying to specifically, he was very, very concerned about art and the constraints on art. And he said, look, China has a long history of culture, and part of that culture, is a ceramic culture, but it's much broader and deeper than that. And contemporary artists were told, well, look, you should really basically worship and fetishize the past and try and emulate that. And if you want to be a great artist, try and make, say, a pot like a great potter before you, and if you get lucky, you'll approach that greatness. And he said that that was a real constraint, that if artists and people were not willing to sort of alter and in some cases destroy past culture, you couldn't actually make new culture. And I think that's actually a very profound insight. And so I got to thinking, well, what is the equivalent in America? I mean, America obviously doesn't have hundreds of years of ceramic culture or any other culture. It's a relatively new country, about 230 or some odd years old. And so what kind of things constrain people? Well, actually, the U.S. Constitution, people prattle on a lot about how this document brings freedom and guarantees freedom. Well, you should read it. It actually mostly is a document of, well, this is when the vote will happen. This is how old you have to be president. These are the three branches of government. This is how there's upper and lower house, Senate and Congress. It's actually a pretty dry document mostly. And to the degree there's anything talking about freedom, it's in the Bill of Rights. But more importantly, it is a document that was written by slave owners and friends of slave owners to develop the political and legal framework for a system whose economy was based in slavery. It's a very outmoded idea, and the idea of freedom, you get literally 4 paragraphs in, and they're talking about slavery and owning human beings and giving disproportionate voting rights to people who own lots of human beings. And so it's not a very liberatory document. And so here's me standing with the U.S. Constitution. Here's the U.S. Constitution in flames, and here's the Constitution in ashes. I, really sort of, drawing inspiration from Ai and changing culture, I think people would be far more emancipated if they're willing to actually change, to look at freedom from a contemporary perspective and instead of trying to look at an outmoded idea of freedom from the 18th century. So, it is a work that's now about 2 years old. It masquerades as a set of wanted posters for things that are not illegal that youth get harassed by the police for all the time. And so in this case, wanted for unspecified reason, perpetrator, probable cause to stop and question. And then the language below that, sort of down here, is very much in police speak. It's, unk, male, black, height 5'9", weight 160 pounds, hair black, eyes unknown, last known address 000, unknown. And so if you're actually looking for somebody, knowing that they lived at 000, unknown is not particularly helpful. But, and then it goes on to say, on Friday, July 19th, 2014, at approximately 19:45 hours, a male black, approximately 19 to 23 years of age, wearing a blue overshirt and black denim pants, was observed standing in front of a building at 549 West 29th. Goes on to say, suspect has previously been stopped and searched numerous times and is not armed and is not dangerous. And then it sort of flips the script on that. It says, the suspect is wanted by his family, friends, and neighbors. To download copies of this poster and display it, go to wantedproject.com. And so this was a project that was a multifaceted, multi-layered, community-engaged artwork. And so on the streets where these posters were, and I'll show you images of them being placed on the street later, they just look like wanted posters, which you've probably seen around. Most of the time you probably ignore them. But in addition to being actual wanted posters that were placed in public, it was a project which was a community engaged work where I worked with about 12 youth over the course of about 3 months, talking about what their experience of being criminalized is by this system. And it also was town hall and community fora where they met, but also met with activists, and the activists would talk about not just these youth's individual experience, but to talk about mass incarceration in a much broader way. And it also was a sketch session, a forensic sketch session, where some of these youth had their pictures drawn by a police sketch artist based on descriptions that adults gave the artist that had seen the youth previously. And that was done sort of as a performance. So this is Kevin Blythe Sampson meeting with one of the adults who had volunteered to give descriptions of a youth he had seen the day before. And this is, you can see it's, it is done in public. People can watch this process happening. And I'm going to show you a couple-minute video, actually about 4 minutes, of this process unfolding.
You want to take a look through this at all and see if you see anything similar? Yeah. Let's take another look. Yeah. I want to keep going, and I want to add,
As part of this artwork, several young adults and activists met in Harlem to discuss police intrusion into the lives of youth and how the youth are criminalized. The following day, 5 adults gave descriptions of 5 youth, who they only briefly met, to Kevin Blythe Sampson, a police-trained composite sketch artist. Sampson made sketches based on these descriptions.
all right. So the way we do a composite is first I want to get a physical description of you, which I want a description of the suspect. I want to write that down, just casually. I want to write that down. After I do that, we're going to start building a composite. What we're looking for is we're not trying to make a portrait. We're trying to make a likeness. Could I ask you how long you saw the person for?
1 minute.
Just a minute? Wow, it's going to be fun. You saw him for 1 minute, okay. Is this a male or female?
Male.
It was a male, good. The race?
Dark skin.
Dark skin. Could you tell if they were African American, Hispanic, or you couldn't? Okay. By dark skin, you mean dark skin, dark.
Dark light skin.
Okay. Dark, light skin. Okay, we'll show you
So
pictures.
not dark.
Dark as I am?
No.
Okay.
A little lighter.
Lighter than I am. Okay. Would you say that that person was thin, fat, medium? So we have a dark-skinned male, early 20s, clean-shaven, slim, with pointy eyes. What color would you say he was out of these pictures? Do you see anything here?
Yeah, maybe These are,
These colors, okay. So, face shape, let's start out with the shape of her face.
I'm gonna say that it was,
There's many more pictures, so. What I'm gonna do now is just make a light drawing. I'm gonna just block in the face real quickly, and as we go along, we'll redefine it. And you said, but they were fuller than these lips.
yeah, a little bit more,
Okay.
but that,
That sort of shape. Would you describe this guy as, I hate to put you on the spot, handsome, ugly, normal, you know, generic looking guy?
handsome.
Handsome, okay. If it doesn't look like him, say it. We keep working.
Like a little darker caramel,
Okay.
if that helps.
Yeah, and keep in mind that they're going to Xerox these. When they do,
Right.
it's going to drop. It's going to get 2
Make it
shades
darker.
darker. If I make it darker, you print it, it's going to be like, you know,
Right.
you're going to see it.
These sketches, which were both specific and generic, were then inserted into wanted posters that describe non-illegal activity for which the police routinely harass young adults, especially young Black and Latino men.
And so the things that people were supposedly wanted for, like Fitt's description, those were taken from New York City Police Department reports on why they stopped and frisked people. So from 2004 to 2012, the police stopped about 5 million people in the city of New York. And about 10%, 11% of them were stopped because they fit the description of a known criminal. And so if you do the numbers, basically every Black and Latino man fit the description of a known criminal in the eyes of the police. 43% of those 5 million were stopped because they moved furtively, whatever that is. And just remember, these stops, they range from just humiliating and degrading where the people were stopped, including amongst their friends, to typically they were a form of sexual assault. They were basically molested, and they could escalate to something like death in the case of Eric Garner. This is not just, excuse me, sir, may I have a polite conversation with you? I'd like to know where you're going. These are very invasive, life-threatening events. And so, the youth really wanted their photos to be drawn as part of this, the youth that I work with, young adults. And so we then took them out to the community, and we went to pizza joints and delis and bodegas and nail salons and barbershops and said, hey, can we put up wanted posters? And fortunately, a lot of people said, well, no, you can't. But then we said, no, you don't understand. These are not wanted posters looking for real criminals. These are wanted posters about the criminalization of youth. And so when we said that, everybody had a story to tell, and almost all the places, about 95% of the places that we went to, were eager to put them up. And then, because this was a way of extending the conversation beyond the relatively small numbers of people we reached when I was working with the young men and young women, and even the people that were at the small fora that were held. But this was actually all over the streets of Harlem, which is where the work was concentrated. And lots of the people that worked at these places, the barbers, the guy at the Chinese fast food place, they became advocates for discussing what the project was about. And we also made large versions and posted them up on construction sites. And so, when we did this, we knew that if we just put up one or two, people would walk right by. When I see wanted posters, I don't really pay any attention to them. But if you see like a bunch, you're like, wait, what's going on here? There must be some huge crime wave. And then if you see tons and tons of them, you're like, well, let me pay attention to it. And so these were really all over 125th Street from the way west side on Broadway over to Malcolm X, and then from Malcolm X on 125th up to 145th. And they were on, just all over, in stores, on light posts, and yeah.
Money to burn, money burn. Money to 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 burn. Does anybody have any money to burn? Does anybody have any money to burn? Money to burn. Do you have money to burn? Money to burn. 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 Maybe you should give it to somebody. Money to burn. Money to burn. Money to burn. Money to burn. I don't see any. Does anybody have any money to burn?
Oh, that really went off.
Money to burn. Do you have money to burn, sir? Money to burn. Money to burn. Money to burn. Do you have money to burn, sir? How about you? Do you have money to burn? Money to burn. Money to burn. Money to burn.
Good, you got ID on you? Can I see it, please? As far as I'm concerned, you're being disorderly right now.
Being disorderly? Well, if you need me to stop, I can stop.
Well, yeah, as far as I'm concerned, yes, there is. Can I see your identification?
You have been arrested for disorderly conduct? No.
Look up when I've been arrested.
No, I'm just asking you. I'm asking you the courtesy. I'm not arresting you. I'm just asking.
Well, can I have my ID back first?
Well, not yet. If you have any
back up.
summonses or anything like that?
Back up, bro. Alright, so disorderly conduct. I have a return date for August 19th. You gotta go to court. It's on the sun, 346 Broadway. Go there, there will be a warrant for your arrest. Hopefully you can find some better ways to use your money, right?
Money to burn. 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 Money to burn.
So the instructions that inform people what to do once they got into the voting booth, were asked to fill out the questionnaire, but it was preceded by two questions. One was, would you have voted during slavery? And the other is, would you vote in a segregated election? And the artwork that they were given, the 6x9-inch artwork, basically reproduced the text from the questionnaire and then had an image of the historic figure, Dred Scott, the enslaved man who sued for his freedom. And it asked people, there was a small strip of paper in there that asked people to put it up in their apartments and have conversations about it. So it was trying to extend the ideas of the artwork into people's homes beyond what people saw, for those who didn't make it to the performance. So this next work is a work I don't show very much, but I think it's actually oddly a bit appropriate now, so I'm going to give you a quick tour through it. It's an installation called Pole Dance, and it basically consists of lots of 8.5 by 11-inch printouts on some clipboards and some other clipboards that people could hold, and instructions to fill out a questionnaire. The questionnaire was different than, it didn't lead to what was on the clipboards. They were different, but the clipboards had lots of graphs and polls, and so you'll see, like this poll said, just had information, but the question was removed. So it just had very worried, 10%, not too worried, 36%, somewhat worried, 26%, not worried at all, 24%. And so, part of the project is about how polls really shape opinion as opposed to really gaining data and investigating things. And so there's a questionnaire which was also available online that people could fill out. And it was sort of about the absurdity and how polls, the logic of polls actually tells you what the pollster is trying to gain information about. And so, and this one was a poll from 2003, not a mistake, 62%. 4% no opinion, mistake 34%. And then in 2007, that poll has changed to not a mistake is 24%, 6% of no opinion, and 70% of mistake. And so, you can't really get information from this. These are artworks that posit, they appear to be actually presenting real information, but they are not actually presenting real information. Yes, no opinion either way. Weekly, nearly weekly, monthly, and seldom and never. And so, you don't know what the questions was. Percentage of respondents. Anticipate improvement, 39%. Expect it will stay the same, 36%. It will get worse, 22%. Approve, disapprove. And again, these are all taken from actual polls. I just removed the question. In this poll, men are trending up and women are sort of staying the same. And in this poll, Americans polled American lives and others' lives. American lives were apparently very valued in 1960 or something, and again in 2000. And then there was a set of pie charts. The first set was like bar graphs and line graphs, and these are pie charts. And so these were polls where you could derive what the question was, but it inverts how it should actually be said. And so 89% of young African-American men are not in prison. Well, yeah, that's something to celebrate, but that means 11% are, and that's not so much something to celebrate. Or 83% of American women will not be raped. Well, yeah, but the opposite is actually a pretty damning statistic. So, how polls are presented, what they say, are part of what's questioned by this. And so this was a work that I did originally in, I think, 2009, and then showed it again in 2013, I believe. 89.6% of people surveyed by the government are employed. So it means there's huge unemployment, but that's not what that poll is actually telling. Or 44% of people killed by police are not minorities, which means that the majority are. 12% of Americans do not believe that God or some force other than evolution is needed to explain human development. 95.5% of the world population that is not American. So, particularly in this election season where we're seeing lots of polls, I just wanted to drop this in. So a lot of my work deals with history, as you've seen with the Dred Scott decision piece. And this is a project this is not a photograph I took. It's actually a photograph which you can see an original of at the Brooklyn Museum. And it's a photograph of a banner that the NAACP would put out whenever there was a lynching. So their offices were actually right near here. They were on Fifth Avenue at just above 14th Street. And so they would put out this banner that was pretty large that said a man was lynched yesterday whenever a man was lynched anywhere in the country. And unfortunately, I think that that banner needs updating, so I've recreated it like this. And just for reference, there were more people, many more people killed by the police in, say, the most recent decade than were killed by lynch mobs at the height of lynch mob terror between 1884 and 1895. And another work that deals with history and looking back at history is a project that I did that actually is also at the Brooklyn Museum, but this is a photograph I didn't take. It's a sort of an iconic photo from the fire hosing of civil rights demonstrators in 1963 in Birmingham, Alabama. And so, when we're used to seeing these photographs, or when you look at them, they show a tremendous oppression. And that's how, I had looked at these for quite some time. But then I started to think about them a lot. And one of the things that this shows is these were people who had the courage to come out and withstand the battering force of a fire hose to try and end Jim Crow oppression and segregation. And so you know, this is oppressive, and on any given day in Birmingham, black people aren't battered by fire hoses. But on any given day, they're both humiliated and degraded by having to, say, drink at a separate water fountain, or not being able to come through the front door if they wanted to get service at a restaurant or something like that. But also it could lead up to things like lynching, and which was, you know, didn't happen every day. All black people obviously weren't lynched, but the threat of lynching hung over everybody, particularly the men, particularly in the South, but not exclusively. So in looking at these photographs, I started to see these are real photographs of resistance. And so I did a durational performance where I worked with a fireman and had them turn a high-pressure water jet onto me, and I, instead of trying to flee the batter of the fire hose, I actually walked into it. And this was a project that was done in 2014, and in October. And Mike Brown had, you know, I believe in August, or maybe even July, it must have been July, was killed by the police. And sort of the hands up, don't shoot became kind of a rallying cry of people around the country saying we don't want the police to murder unarmed youth, particularly black youth. And so in doing this performance, at one point I did the hands up, don't shoot gesture, and it really resonated and connected with about 250 high school students from Bedford-Stuyvesant, which is a poor black neighborhood high school, that came to see the performance live out of a crowd of about 500. And for them, they were high school kids. I mean, the civil rights movement was ancient history. And so, you know, that really collapsed that time frame of the 60s to the present, and actually made that era resonate with them, and which is, I think, really important. A lot of my work actually looks at how the past not only conditions the present, but how it also resides in the present in new form. And so at a moment when people are raising their heads and standing up, I think this work, you know, really speaks to our era. This is also a work that's not mine. This is a Robert Colescott piece, and Hale Woodruff piece, sorry. And it's a picture of a slave mutiny, a mutiny on the Amistad, which was a slave ship, and he was commemorating that. And so there's a decent history of artists, including people like Jacob Lawrence or Kata Kollwitz, commemorating revolts, and particularly slave revolts or peasant uprisings. And so I was inspired by that, and I've actually been thinking a lot about slavery and slave revolts. And so the current project I'm working on, which I can't show you really because it doesn't exist yet, is a project called Slave Rebellion Reenactment, where I'm going to reenact the largest rebellion of enslaved people in North American history. That rebellion happened in 1811, and it started on this location, but in 1811. There were no Domino's Pizza Huts or Domino's factories. It wasn't a strip mall at the time. But if you read that sign, it talks about how a major 1811 slave uprising was organized here. And one of the things that's profoundly interesting about this slave revolt is the slave army got to about 500 people in a city where the population was only 25,000, and it grew that way very quickly, and it was growing before it was put down. And this rebellion was always a long shot at succeeding, but it could have succeeded. It's the only rebellion in the U.S. that actually had a chance of succeeding, and success was not just kill some white people before they get killed, or kill white people and escape and form a maroon colony. They wanted to seize all of Orleans territory, which was basically from what is modern-day Arkansas down to the Gulf of Mexico, and end slavery, which is both a profound vision that modern-day people can learn a lot from, where enslaved people came up with this bold view of freedom. I mean, this is at a time when everybody's prattling on about America being a democracy and freedom, but that freedom is founded on the enslavement of millions of people. And so these people wanted to end that, not just for themselves, but for other people, including people that had not yet been born. And so I want to reenact that with 500 people in period-specific costume with cane knives and sabers and muskets and blunderbusses and horses and everything, and go from this location, which is now La Place, down to about 25 miles. I mean, this is 40 miles upriver from New Orleans, and I want to go to about 15 miles upriver from New Orleans, which was the distance that the actual revolt covered. It'll look something sort of like this. This is just Photoshop. This doesn't exist yet. But what does exist is there's a book of it's an artist book of my research into slavery. It's called Fragments of the Peculiar Institution. And if you want to see sort of some of the research, which is not the same as the artwork, it's just various clippings. It is an artist book on steroids, basically. And so it has things like this, which is the original Dred Scott decision, or an ad for Negroes for sale, which if you're going to have slavery, you have to sell slaves in a market someplace. You'll advertise much as you might advertise, for a Heineken beer or a new car. So and it has photographs that I've taken in New Orleans. And so I will end up close to where I started. I started out with what's the proper way to display a U.S. flag. And the last work I want to end on is a screen print that is imagine a world, and then it faintly says at the bottom, without America. And so it's just a map, and it is a map that instead of having America in the center, Europe and Africa and Antarctica are in the center, which wherever a country makes the map, typically their country is sort of in the center. And so there are maps that exist in the world that don't have the U.S. in the center, but most people here don't really think about that. And because of the format of the painting, and well, it's a screen print, it exists as a screen print on paper and a screen print on canvas. But it's a square, and so, Florida, New York, Maine, we're in there, Alaska's in there, but the Midwest is kind of cut out, as is part of Canada. And I apologize, I mean, Canada, you should have known better than to live next to America. But it's not really about geography, obviously. It's about the disproportionate influence that America has and the fact that I think people need to dream and imagine more. So this work is really calling on people to dream of a world they'd actually want to live in and complicate that by thinking about it without America, regardless of whether you think America is a great place or if you agree with me and think it's actually a lot of this heart of the world's problems often stem from America. It exercises disproportionate influence. Some of the influence is good. I mean, I've traveled to South Africa in the slums of Khayelitsha. I see wild-style graffiti, which is really great. So this culture that was born in the Bronx has traveled to Rome and to Khayelitsha, but also things like American wars. The bombs that are falling and killing kids in Pakistan have U.S. flags painted on them, or the economy, or how it approaches negotiations. So so imagine a world without America. Think about that. It's sort of a thought experiment, and I think a good one to do. And so I will. When coming up with the idea for this work, as I said, I'll end where I started, kind of. When what's the proper way to display the U.S. flag was the center of controversy, I was doing a lot of reading and trying to figure out, well, why defend this work? Why is it important? Why does it matter? And I was a young student at the time, and in college, like most people in college, you have the keys of the world put before you, and you suddenly don't have to think like your parents, which is actually a really good thing, and you question lots of stuff, which is also really good. And so I and many of my friends, one day, you'd be like, oh, I'm a vegan. The next day I'm a Buddhist. The next day I'm an artist. The next, so you're changing philosophies and checking out things. And I had become a young, communist while I was in school, and as part of that, I had discovered some of the writings of Bob Avakian, who is the leader of the Revolutionary Communist Party. And one of the things that I came across that he wrote at that time that really resonated with me because of the controversy around what's the proper way to display a U.S. flag, he wrote that if you can conceive of a world without America, without everything America stands for and everything it does in the world, then you've already taken great strides and begun to get at least a glimpse of a whole new world. If you can envision a world without any imperialism, exploitation, oppression, and the whole philosophy that rationalizes it, a world without division into classes or even different nations, and all the narrow-minded, selfish, outmoded ideas that uphold this, if you can envision all this, then you have the basis for proletarian internationalism. And once you've raised your sights to all of this, how could you not feel compelled to take an active part in the world historic struggle to realize it? Why would you want to lower your sights to anything less? And so Avakian he's a badass thinker, and I think that quote really meant a lot, but a lot of his other writings and videos are really important. He's giving a talk with Cornel West, the radical revolutionary Christian theologian at Riverside Church. It was a talk about, it's called Revolution and Religion, the fight for emancipation and the role of religion, a dialogue between Cornel West and Cornel West and Bob Avakian. And it had 2,000 people attended Riverside. It was really amazing. If you want to check him out, that's a good place to start. You can, and the reason I'm saying this is Avakian both has been inspiring and influences my work, and so in understanding my work actually gives a bit of a sense of that. But also, if you care about humanity, if you want the world to be different than it is, even if you don't think that we need to get to a communist world without exploitation and without oppression, you need to check him out. He is a very deep thinker who's thought a lot about the big questions confronting humanity, and it will, challenge you in really good ways. And so I would encourage you, in addition to thinking about sort of some of what undergirds my art, to think about the world. And so if you want to know more about me, my website is there. If you want to get the book, Fragments from the Peculiar Institution, I've got one copy which people can buy here, but if you want to order it online, you can go to store.criticalpractices.org. And if you want to check out more about Avakian, you can go to revcom.us. And I also have copies of Revolution newspaper, which often prints a lot of Avakian's writing in it. I've got a few copies if people want to buy them. So with that, let's get the lights up and we can have a Q&A. Up there. Well, I mean, I think that, you know, in a certain sense, ultimately, people's views about that artwork largely reflected their political philosophy, which was different than art criticism per se. And so, you know, the senator who went to the measure to both denounce it on the floor of the Senate and help pass legislation which would outlaw it, he was motivated by trying to sort of shield the flag from any criticism, which frankly, you know, who wants to live in a country where you can't criticize the flag of that country, and how far is that from saying you can't criticize the government? And so, but he was trying to create a situation where nobody could actually criticize the flag, and by extension, be more difficult to criticize the government. He, as part of that, many people who didn't like the politics of the work also said, look, this isn't art. But the question is not whether it's art or not. It is art. You might think it's bad art, but the criticism there was that we don't like the politics of the art. And the particular criticism that people were giving when they were calling into talk shows, the people that supported it, they actually were talking about how the interaction with it allowed for them to be participants in an artwork which typically when they went to museums or galleries, they weren't. And so that also was, I think, motivated by some of their political beliefs, but it actually then really did get to art and how the art was functioning and working. And even though they would not know about Hans Haacke or conceptual art, they actually did get it and felt very invited into it, which was different than their experience with many other artworks. And so I think, you know, in terms of, you know, validity, I think that the thing is that people, you know, my ideas and other people's ideas should be tested out in society, and to the degree they correspond with reality, they should be promoted and disseminated more widely throughout society. I mean, you know, right now, one of the reasons I wanted to show pole dance is there's a lot of, you know, arguments, frankly, on sort of both the Republicans and Democrats, but especially amongst the Republicans, where truth doesn't matter at all. They are much more about sort of affect and power, and where truth really is not something they're overly concerned with. I mean, you know, Donald Trump was getting up and saying, well, you know, Mexico's sending rapists and murderers, and it's like, well, it didn't matter whether that was true to him. And so I think truth matters tremendously. And I think that part of the basis of my work, both for my analysis of history that undergirds and embodies the art, is actually rooted in what's true, but actually to the degree the work prescribes an alternative way the world could be, which works like Imagine a World Without America or Burning the U.S. Constitution imply that there could be a different world, is actually grounded on the fact of what I think is a scientific understanding of that the world does not have to be this way. This is not the end of history. And so, you know, I think the battle for truth and validity in that sense really matters. So.
Second question? I was told to talk into the microphone. So my second question is that a lot of your art is influenced by history. Mm-hmm. How interested and how effectively do you think things like the pole dance explore topics of things that extend beyond like the fire hoses, that include tasers, soap that's given out at Rikers, other things that push certain communities into pigeonholes and are scare tactics, essentially?
Well, I think that, you know, if I had more time, I would do a broader range of work, but I, you know, am finite in my capacity to address broader things. A lot of the focus of my work, you know, for decades now has really been the conditions faced by black people in this country, which is not that I feel my nation as a black person is more important than others, but I actually think that it gets a lot of the heart of what America is and why it is obsolete and outmoded, and why, it's like a society that poisons the drinking water of tens of thousands of kids in Flint. It's illegitimate. There's nothing good about it. You don't have, those kids were poisoned because they were poor and black. And you don't need to actually know a great deal more to know that there's something fundamentally, foundationally wrong with this society than that. And so when I make work, say, about Dred Scott decision, it's actually a piece, in a weird way, about democracy and a democracy that's roots are in slavery. And the whole, first you have slavery, then you have Jim Crow, now you have a new Jim Crow. But it's perceived as a piece about black people, and in a certain sense, that's the pivot of the work. And so I think that it works in a similar way to the way pole dance does, but on different questions. Pole dance, in a certain sense, is more, theoretical is probably the wrong word, but it actually touches on a question which both is not as visceral, but looks at sort of manipulation of broader groups that don't necessarily feel, oh, this is my group, this is my identity, which the other work sort of masquerades as, oh, I'm making work about black people because I'm black, but that's actually not what I'm doing. I'm making work about what I perceive to be big questions confronting humanity that all people should actually engage. And so I think pole dance, is effective for getting people to see one way which people are being manipulated, and sort of ridicule some of even the phony science that's used in that manipulation. But I think that's a question for black people, and I also think a question of Dred Scott decision is a question for Latinos and Asians and men and women. It's like this is not. I'm not coming from identity politics, but I do think that there is a way that I because I've lived my life as a black man in America, I have particular insights to what that means, and it is such a fault line touchstone question. To the degree I have more time and more insight, one thing I'm really, really trying to figure out, there's a sort of a shortcoming in my work, is that I have not really done much work that focused specifically on how women are degraded, hassled, and treated as basically punching bags and sex objects in this society. And that's an area where I'd like to explore more, but I don't have plans to do that right now, because I do think that particularly as people are looking at politics and art, there's so much identity politics, which I think is frankly, it's a constraint at this point. It is, there's a lot of relativism in it, that everybody has their own individual truth and there is no objective truth, which is, I just think, philosophically wrong. And I think it also pits people against each other that should actually be looking at what are the questions confronting all of us and how do we get to a world we'd actually want to live in. So.
Hi.
Hi.
My name is George. In reference to the movements, I'm actually a child from the 60s. I was a little kid growing up, and it was an exciting time. It was a turbulent time, but we actually had leaders. We had Robert F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King and others. Since that time, and also maybe in the early 70s, a lot of the movements, we had the Young Lords, a lot of other movement people that really cared about their communities. There is no such thing like that today, which is a shame. And I think if we had some sort of revolution within that sense, maybe we would be able to fight better against the system. Now, let me say this. I was a former law enforcement officer myself, but I've been, before that, I grew up in that same era where, we didn't understand the rights. I think one of the things we need to do really is to teach the kids, or maybe teach them in high school, or maybe earlier, about the law, the right, the penal law, more or less, so they can understand their rights. A lot of people don't understand it, and because of that, they're intimidated by the laws that are governing this country. But again, I do think that we need some sort of leadership, people to come up, because unfortunately today, I think a lot of people are just within their own selves and not really willing to take that extra step to make a reform of the way the government is being run.
Well, thanks. I think sort of the question of leadership is a huge question, and I think people right at this moment, in a weird way, are grappling with it. I mean, there's both a lot of people that are really upset. I think that's part of what's fueling a lot of the right-wing populism of Donald Trump, and I think also a lot of people are really upset, and that's why sort of the social democratic populism of Bernie Sanders is actually getting a hearing. I think, though, that the question of what sort of leadership people need is connected to what you're trying to do in the world and what you're trying to change. And so, you know, I think the leadership provided by Bob Avakian, who's a revolutionary communist, he wants humanity to get to a radically different world, a world without oppression, without exploitation, without classes. And that is actually very emancipatory, and I think people should connect with and get into that. There is not a recognized leadership today, either of Avakian or of other people, and that's a problem. I mean, that is actually a real problem that is, you know, in the absence of that, people are gravitating towards leaders who are not going to solve the problems that they confront. I mean, it's like, you know, there are a lot of really radical intellectuals have thrown their weight in behind Bernie Sanders. You know, the Ta-Nehisi Coates, Michelle Alexander, and a lot of people that I really respect and admire are saying, well, look, the way to go in this election is Bernie. But let's be real. Bernie is not, first of all, he's not even frankly talking that much about mass incarceration. His big thing is inequality. And the inequality, I mean, if he wants to kind of wind the clock back to 1970, and where there is not quite as much economic polarization in America, that's just saying, well, let's redistribute the spoils that America gets from the rest of the world. And, you know, we're still going to have, you know, people in Bangladesh making T-shirts that are cheap for us to afford, and people in China, I mean, look, I got an iPhone right here. This was made by people in China, several of whom were deciding to jump to their deaths because the working conditions were so brutal. I don't have any interest in the exploitation that exists around the world to have the relative freedom and luxury that I personally have, that many people don't have in this society, but that Bernie's trying to rejig to get onto. I think, so the question of what leadership do you need is a question of what world do we need? And so I think that's something we should really think about. And in the 60s, it wasn't. You did have people like Fred Hampton and Huey P. Newton and Malcolm X that were actually looking at how do you replace the system with a different system. And that was actually what was enabling lots of people to move. I mean, you know, initially Martin Luther King was out there, but then, you know, and you talked about the Young Lords, which, you know, and all sorts of people suddenly had a vehicle through which to act. And that was great. And we need that, again, we need a movement for revolution. But part of doing that, and I think, you know, it's like it's counterintuitive for most people who are like now sort of open to, we need some sort of fundamental change to say, well, look, we need, you know, a communist leader that I've never heard of. But I would say, check him out. It is not your daddy's communism. He's thinking about a lot of questions that concern you, and that's the leadership I think that we need. But that's a longer conversation, but I thank you for raising it. And I've actually forgotten the second part of your question, or... Yeah, educate. Okay, yes, thanks. So educating the youth, I mean, I think I disagree a little bit. I mean, I think youth should be educated. I think the educational system here is really bad in most of the country, you know, including where something as basic as evolution is a contested question and not taught. But I think part of the problem, and I was at a really interesting talk last night by Kwame Anthony Appiah talking about W.B. Du Bois. And he said, look, in Du Bois's early life, he thought, well, look, if we basically let white people know that their racism is unscientific, then they'll stop being racist. If we actually show that black people are human beings, then they'll get it. And in his later life, he realized, wait a minute, there's something more, there's more dynamic in play. And that is that they're ruling ideas of a society, and a society that is based on those. And so I don't think that, say, you know, Eric Garner or Mike Brown or Trayvon Martin or you know, any of the number of videos that we see, Walter Scott, Freddie Gray, they're not dead because they didn't know their rights. They're dead because this system oppresses and exploits people and has a police force which is like unleashed to go murder people, even on video, and then defend that. You know, so I mean, I think people should know their rights and exercise them, but I think the bigger right is this is a society based on exploitation at its root. And the right of this system to continue to exploit people is something that if you get in the way of that, then whatever right you have is going to be overruled and overthrown. So we need to get rid of this system. Okay, well, well, thank you. I suspect we probably have to leave the auditorium, but if anybody does want to get a copy of Revolution newspaper, I've got them, or Fragments from the Peculiar Institution, or just talk with me a little bit more informally, I'll stick around for a bit. But whatever we have to do to get out of the space or whatever, I'm happy to do. Thanks.